Take a deep breath. You can do this, my child.
I need you to stay with me for this part. Not because it is difficult, though it is. Not because it is dark, though it goes to places I did not know existed. When I was the woman standing at a window 18 months ago, writing in a notebook, and believing that documentation was the most dangerous weapon available to a person who knew how to use it. I need you to stay with me. Because this part is mine. The decisions I made that I cannot take back and would not take back. The love that cost me more than I understood when I was inside it. The children I made from that love, and the night in a hospital room when I understood finally and completely that some stories do not end when you close the door. Some stories follow you into the delivery room. The contractions started at 4 a.m. I know this because I had been awake since 3. Lying in the dark, both hands resting on my stomach, feeling the specific weight of 2 people I had not yet met, but already knew completely. My mother was asleep in the chair beside the bed, her head tilted at the angle that meant she had fought sleep and lost it suddenly, the way she always did. The hospital was quiet, the way hospitals are quiet at 4 a.m. Not empty, not still, but holding its breath. I had chosen this hospital specifically. Private, secure. The kind of place where the staff used last names, and the security desk required identification from everyone who entered above the 3rd floor. I had made this choice 6 months ago, with the same methodical attention I had applied to everything in the last 2 years. I had made it with my lawyer present, and a list of requirements that had made the hospital administrator look at me with the specific expression of someone recalibrating their assessment of the woman across the desk. I was not being paranoid. I was being prepared. There is a difference. I had learned it at significant cost, and I was not going to forget the lesson. The contractions came closer together as the morning arrived. My mother woke without being called, the way mothers wake when something is happening to their children, regardless of the distance or the depth of sleep. She held my hand and said things in Yoruba that I will not translate, because some things belong only to the language they were spoken in. The medical team moved around me with the focused comb of people who were very good at what they did and knew it. At 7:43 in the morning, my daughter arrived. At 7:51, my son. They were placed on my chest, and I looked at them and felt something I do not have language for. Not joy exactly. Joy is too light a word for something that heavy and that certain. Something more like recognition. Like meeting people I'd been waiting for without knowing I was waiting. My mother was crying. I looked at my children and I thought about their father. I thought about the 11 months. I thought about the morning I had sat in a bathroom holding a test and understanding that the universe had a particular kind of humor that was not cruel exactly, but was certainly not gentle. I thought about my mother's face when I told her. Just her. Just us. The way she had gone very still and then held me for a long time without speaking. I thought about the decision I had made to say nothing. Not yet. Not while everything was still in motion. Not while the story was still being written in rooms I was not in. My mother stepped out to call my sister. The room was quiet. The babies were sleeping on my chest. With the absolute trust of people who had not yet learned that the world required more from you than simply existing in it. And then the door opened.
They were wearing black, both of them. Masks covering everything above their mouths. They moved with the specific efficiency of people who had done this before, who had planned this, who knew exactly where they were going and how long they had. I had time to understand what was happening. I did not have time to stop it. One of them reached for my son. I screamed. I screamed in a way I had not known my body was capable of producing sound. The kind of scream that comes from somewhere below language, below thought, below every composed and calculated thing I had spent 2 years building in myself. Pure animal. Pure mother. The other one blocked the door. My son was gone before the first nurse arrived. But I need to take you back, because you need to understand how we got here. You need to understand what was in that document. And you need to understand that the people who took my son did not do it because they were monsters. They did it because they were afraid of what I knew. And what I knew was everything.
My lawyer had been practicing commercial and family law in Lagos for 22 years, and she had in that time developed the specific quality of stillness that very good lawyers develop when they are hearing something that is worse than they expected, but are not going to allow that to show in their face. She had been still for a very long time when I finished telling her what I had found. I had found it because of a document I filed 6 weeks earlier, not the affidavit. That came later. What I filed first was a simple request for a property search, a routine legal instrument, the kind of thing that costs a small fee and returns public records that anyone could access if they knew what to look for and had the patience to look. I had both.
The property search was for a development in the Ibeju-Lekki corridor of Lagos, a parcel of land, approximately 400 hectares, acquired in 2003 through a shell company registered in the British Virgin Islands. The shell company had 2 directors. One was a subsidiary of a Korean construction holding group, whose parent company was, if you followed the chain of ownership through 4 intermediary entities across 3 jurisdictions, a family enterprise. The other director was a Nigerian real estate vehicle, whose beneficial owner was Chief Emmanuel Adeyemi. The land had been acquired at a price significantly below market value. The mechanism by which it had been acquired at that price was not in the public records. But the name of the government official who had approved the acquisition
was. He was currently a minister. He had been, in 2003, a junior official in the Lagos State Ministry responsible for land allocation. The original landholders were a community of approximately 3,000 people in the Abeju-Lekki area who had been farming that land for 4 generations. They received a compensation payment that amounted to less than 3% of the land's assessed value. This was the foundation, but it was not the darkest part. The darkest part was what the land had been used for. Between 2004 and 2009, the parcel had been used as a transit facility, not for construction materials, which is what the planning documents described.
For something that moved at night, in containers, through a port facility that the Korean family's logistics subsidiary had operating rights to. I am not going to use the specific words for what moved through that facility. I will say that what moved through it was not goods. The NGO records I found, filed by an international human rights organization in 2008, described the Abeju-Lekki area as a documented transit point for a trafficking network operating between West Africa and Southeast Asia. I sat with this information for 4 days before I told anyone. And when I finally told her, she was still for a very long time. And then she said,
Genevieve, you understand what this means? I said, yes. She said, this is not a boundary notice. This is not a financial dispute. This is not a divorce matter. I said, I know. She said, if you move forward with this, you are not fighting an ex-husband. You are filing against a network that has operated for 20 years, has never faced prosecution, and has, by implication, protection in places you cannot fully map. I said, I know that too. She looked at me and said, and him, the man you love, his family's subsidiary is a director of the shell company.
His name is not on it, but his family's name is. I said, I know. She said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to do what is right, and I want to do it in a way that does not destroy the one person in this story who chose correctly. At every point, he was given a choice. She looked at me for a long time. She said, that may not be possible. I said, I know, but I'm gonna try. I had not expected the women. That sounds like something that should have been obvious in retrospect, and perhaps it was, and I simply had not allowed myself to look directly at it, because looking directly at it required accepting that what had happened to me was not specific, was not the result of something particular about me, that it was instead a pattern, repeated, refined, applied. There were 4 of them. Their names are theirs, and I will not share them here. Spoke to her. I did not know it was possible to feel grief for a version of a thing you thought you understood, until you discovered it was worse than you thought. The third had never been in a relationship with him. She had been a business partner. The business had not failed.
It had been structured from the beginning to extract the maximum possible capital before the point at which her signature became legally untenable. She was still in litigation. The fourth was the one who changed everything. She was a woman in her 50s, with the specific bearing of someone who had been through something so significant that it had restructured not just her circumstances, but her entire understanding of what she was capable of surviving.
She had said nothing for 15 years because she was afraid. She said something now because she told me, tired of being afraid of men who counted on women's fear as a structural element of their operations. I held her hands across a table in a quiet restaurant, and I said, "You don't have to do this." She said, "I know. That's why I'm going to."
There was an evening in my apartment when the Lagos rain came suddenly and completely, the way it did in that city, without negotiation. We sat on my balcony because neither of us wanted to go inside, and he held an umbrella over both of us that was too small and slightly tilted and entirely useless against rain coming sideways. And I laughed at the uselessness of it, and he laughed at me laughing. And we were both completely wet by the time we conceded the balcony to the rain and went inside. He made tea with the careful attention he gave everything he did. And we sat on the floor with our backs against the sofa because neither of us had decided to sit on the sofa. And the floor had simply happened. And he said, I have been happy before." He paused. I don't think I understood what it actually was until recently. And I looked at him. This man who had told me the full truth of himself at a kitchen table and asked nothing of me afterward, except to decide what I thought. And I thought, this is what it looks like when someone means what they say. There was a morning when I woke before him and lay in the specific luxury of watching someone sleep when they did not know they were being watched. He slept with his arm across his face in a way that should have looked undignified, and somehow didn't. I thought about all the mornings I had woken beside the man I had married, and felt the particular low-grade vigilance of someone assessing the emotional wither before their feet touched the floor. I thought about how the absence of that vigilance felt. Not like peace exactly, but like a room with more air in it. He opened his eyes and found me watching, and didn't reach for composure. He just said, "Good morning," with the simple satisfaction of a man who had woken up to something he was glad was real. There was a night when I told him about my father. Not the facts of him. The facts were simple. He had died when I was 11. He had been a man who laughed easily and built furniture with his hands and called me his serious girl. I told him the texture of him, the specific quality of being loved by a man who was not afraid of your intelligence, who found it delightful rather than inconvenient, who taught me without knowing he was teaching.
what it felt like to be seen accurately and chosen anyway. He listened to all of it. When I finished, he said he would have liked that you chose someone who knows what to do with that. I said, I think so too. There was the night before the sentencing. I will not describe that night in detail. I will say that it was long and honest, and that we said everything we needed to say, and some things we did not have words for, and that when the morning came, we were both very still and very present, in the specific way of people who are paying close attention, because they understand that the moment they are in is significant. He said, whatever happens tomorrow. I said, don't. He said, I need to say it. I said, I know. Say it. He said, whatever happens tomorrow, you are the clearest decision I have ever made. I looked at him. I said, the feeling is mutual. I did not know when I said it that I was already carrying his children. I did not know it for 3 more weeks. My lawyer had said it would be precise, or it would be nothing. We were precise. We submitted the property records, the shell company filings, the NGO documentation, the financial analysis that had taken 3 months and traced 20 years of transactions through 4 jurisdictions. We submitted the testimonies of 4 women, properly witnessed, legally certified.
We submitted the testimony of the woman who had been afraid for 15 years and had given it in person to the relevant authorities, with a composure I will remember for the rest of my life. What we did not submit was anything that directly named the man I loved as a participant in his family's operations. She said it was the most precisely constructed submission she had seen in 22 years of practice. She also said it may not be enough to keep him out of it entirely. She was right. The document they found was a signature page from a 2019 corporate filing. A meeting he had attended at his father's request. The one he had left when he understood what he was in. What he had not known, because he had been 25 and had not yet learned to read the architecture of his father's paperwork, was that he had signed something before he left. A standard attendee acknowledgement form, presented with the specific casual efficiency of someone who had learned to capture signatures before people could examine what they were signing. His name was on a document. He was sentenced. His lawyers negotiated it to 11. He served every day of it. 3 weeks into his sentence, I sat across from him in a room that smelled of institutional cleaning products and told him I was pregnant. He was very still for a long time. Then he said, "How long?" I said, 11 weeks. He looked at me, and I watched him do the calculation and arrive at the specific date. And he said, the night before the sentencing. I said, yes. He said,
Why didn't you tell me sooner? I said, because I needed to decide what I wanted first, before anyone else's feelings about it became part of the decision. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, and what did you decide? I said, I decided that these children are going to know their father, and that their father is going to be a man who chose honestly. At every point, he was given a choice, and that whatever the world decides to do with that, it does not change what I know about who you are. He said nothing for a long time. Then he reached across the table and put his hands over mine and said my name. I said, say it again. He said my name. I closed my eyes for exactly 1 second.
5 counts of fraud, obtaining financial benefit by deception, conspiracy to defraud, fraudulent misrepresentation, 2 counts of financial exploitation through relationship, a charge that his lawyers fought hard and lost. 15 years on each count, to run consecutively on 3 of them. He looked at me across the courtroom when the sentence was delivered. I did not look away. I did not feel what I had expected to feel. I felt something quieter, something closer to the specific relief of a woman who has spent a long time carrying something heavy and has finally been permitted to set it down.
Chief Adeyemi and my children's grandfather had not waited for the sentencing. They had been watching the proceedings with the attention of men who had been in rooms where things went wrong before and had survived by moving faster than the consequences. They moved within 48 hours of each other. One left Lagos on a private flight to Dubai. From Dubai to somewhere that has not been confirmed as of the date I am telling you this story. His passport was flagged after he left. His assets in Nigeria were frozen 11 days after his departure. The other left Seoul on a commercial flight to Singapore, the last confirmed sighting. His name no longer appeared on the directorship records of any of his companies as of 6 weeks after his departure. The companies continued to operate.
Both men were classified as fugitives by their respective national authorities and by Interpol. Both men had people who were still loyal to them. I had known this. I had accounted for it. What I had not fully accounted for was the specific nature of the loyalty, that it was not ideological, that it was not even financial exactly, that it was the loyalty of people who had been protected by these men for long enough that protecting them back had become indistinguishable from self-preservation. People who believe they are protecting themselves do not stop when the threat is removed. They stop when the thing they are afraid of is removed. And what they were afraid of was what I knew.
The nurse arrived 30 seconds after my son was taken. 30 seconds is a very long time. My mother came back through the door 40 seconds after that and understood what had happened from my face before I had finished forming the words, and made a sound I had never heard from her before. A sound that came from a place in her I had not known existed. Security arrived. The police arrived. The hospital floor was locked down with the specific controlled urgency of a system that had protocols for this and was deploying them, and whose protocols were not going to be fast enough. My daughter was on my chest. She was sleeping. She did not know that her brother was gone. I held her with both arms, and I looked at the door, and I thought about the document in the filing cabinet. Could that be it?
I thought about what it contained and what it had set in motion and what the men who were now afraid of it were capable of. I thought about the man I loved. I thought about the fact that he had been released 14 days ago, that he was in Seoul for 48 hours to manage the handover of his firm's projects before coming back to Lagos, that he was on a plane right now, that he did not know I had given birth, that he did not know what had just happened in this room. I thought about the specific irony of a woman who had spent 2 years being the most prepared person in every room she entered, and had not somehow prepared for this. And then I stopped thinking, and I picked up my phone, and I called the one number I had not called yet. Not my lawyer, not the police who were already there. I called the number that the one who had been afraid for 15 years and decided to stop, had given me 6 months ago. The number she had said, use this only if it gets to the point where official channels are not enough.
He answered on the second ring. I said, "They took my son." He said, "I know. We've been watching the hospital for 3 weeks. We have footage. We have a direction. I need you to trust me for the next 6 hours." I said, "Do you know where he is?" He said, "Not yet, but I will." I looked at my daughter sleeping on my chest. I said, 6 hours. He said, 6 hours. Stay in the hospital. Do not move. Do not speak to anyone about this call. I said, "I understand." He said my name. He said, "We built this case together for 8 months. I am not going to let it end here." I said, "I know." I put the phone down. My mother was looking at me. She said, "Who was that?" I said, "Someone who has been watching longer than any of us knew." She said, "What does that mean?" I said, "It means the document in the filing cabinet was not the only document." She looked at me. I looked at the door, and I thought about 2 old men somewhere in the world who had been running for 8 months and believed that taking my son would make me stop. They had mistaken silence for weakness once before. They had mistaken patience for compliance. They had mistaken a woman with a notebook for a woman without a plan. I had been building the second plan since the day I filed the first document, since before he was sentenced, since before the trial, since the night I sat in a lawyer's office and heard the word exploitation applied to something I had lived inside for 7 years. My son was somewhere in this city. His father was on a plane. The man on the phone had footage and a direction and 11 years of preparation. And I had something none of them had. I had been the most underestimated person in this story from the beginning. And I was not done yet.
My name is Genevieve. I am 36 years old. I have a daughter sleeping on my chest and a son somewhere in this city, and a man on a plane who does not know he is about to land into the most important night of his life. I have a notebook with everything written in it. I have a lawyer who has not slept in 3 days. I have a witness who was afraid for 15 years and decided to stop. I have 4 women whose names I will protect until my last breath, and whose testimony dismantled an empire. I have a mother in this room who has not left my side, and I have something else. Something I have had since the night I stood in a doorway on a rooftop and heard a man describe me as useful and not permanent, and felt underneath the ice of that betrayal the first clear thought I had had in 7 years. He was wrong about what I was. They were all wrong about what I was. And I'm about to show every single one of them exactly how wrong